Good day. I'm Chris Noto. I've been appointed the new archivist of Emerson Lake Palmer. Tony Ortiz was taking care of that, and sadly he passed away. I met Tony in 1997 in Cleveland at the Nautica stage when ELP played there. Anyway, he was a nice guy, and I'm honored to be the archivist, but unfortunately, Tony, I got it by Tony's demise, which is kind of a drag. But I was contacted by Bruce Pilato and Carl Palmer and Stuart Young, who recently visited me here in my house, which was very cool. I'm not going to say too much about the upcoming 50th anniversary of the band. I'll let them do that. I'm glad to be a part of it in a small way, doing my part with all the archives I have, which basically is my collection. I've been collecting ELP recordings and bootlegs and whatnot and paraphernalia since I think I went to a record show in the 90s, and I got my first bootleg, which was the Buffalo Rich Stadium show in 74, July 26, 74, and I listened to it, and it was the first Brain Solid live that I heard other than the triple live, and it blew my mind. And I made a point of getting out there and finding as much as I could. And I've got quite a bit, and believe me, it's a small fortune I've spent. But the guys wanted some footage that I had, and I gave it to them. I'll tell you the story of how I got into Emerson Lake Palmer. It was, I think it was around 1972 or 72. I think I was 11 years old or whatever. I was listening to Led Zeppelin, Cream, Black Sabbath, the Beatles, Dave Clark 5 when I was younger. And I was tinkering with my FM radio. I was into shortwave radio. I had a hobby back then. I always used to tinker around with it. But I never listened to FM. And one night I just said, okay, I'm going to tinker around. And I heard some acoustic guitar, and it was the Sage. And Greg Lake was singing, and I was thought, wow, that sounds pretty cool, So I'm listening to it, and it fades, and all of a sudden I heard all this craziness. Emerson with the pitch ribbon. I never heard anything like it in my life. I asked my brother what it was. He said, well, I think it's something that you attach to the organ, not knowing himself exactly what it was. But anyhow, it was pictures at an exhibition. That was the first thing I ever heard. And having a paper boy, I was a paper boy, having a paper route. I went out and bought it. I liked it, and that was that. I got into ELP, and they weren't my favorite band yet. It was when I saw the Wide World of Entertainment, and I saw them live performing, that's what did it. And I went out and bought every album. Anyhow, being in the archivist for the band, I will help out in any way I can. That's the main purpose of being the archivist. I have tons and tons of footage, recordings, audio, video. I have a lot of posters, all this stuff. It's, as you can see right behind me here. I don't know if it's coming across very well, but anyhow, if anybody has any questions, put the questions in the comments of this video on the page. Don't overwhelm my messenger, please, because I can't answer everybody all. The messenger goes off, it'll be driving me nuts all day long. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the comments on the ELP Titans page and whatever other page this will appear on. Now, Dyanne Klinko wanted me to tell some stories, so I'm going to tell a story. The main story is the skull story, and let me show you. And it glows in the dark, by the way. Anyway, I went to see ELP in '93 at Massey Hall in Toronto. And they played the Friday night and the Saturday night. And I had tickets for the Saturday night with my then girlfriend. And I was sitting at home, and Greg Lake had an interview on Q107. And I'm sitting at home and I'm getting ants in my pants. It's like, they're playing tonight, and I went upstairs and I said to my girlfriend, I said, I gotta go. So I split. I went down, and I didn't have a ticket. I went to the window and I got 7th row right in front of Emerson. I was like, okay, this is cool. Obviously, it's because I went by myself, and it was a single ticket. But before I went into the venue, there was a guy out there with all this paraphernalia, just, a street vendor, and he had this skull. Put on some light here so we can see here. And I bought the skull. It was $10. I mean, this is really heavy, So I asked him for a bag, and luckily he did. I put it in the bag, so I'm holding on to this throughout the concert. So I watched the concert. Afterwards, I went around the back where the tour bus was, and I had this in the bag. And the boys came out. Emerson went on the bus. Palmer went on the bus, and a bunch of some other people. And Greg Lake stood out there and started hamming it up with everybody. There was a bunch of people there talking. So I eventually got to say something to him, and I said, hey, Greg. And this is exactly what I said to him. I said, hey, Greg. And as I'm saying it, I'm pulling this out. I said, how about, would you mind signing my brain solid surgery skull? And his eyes lit up. He goes, whoa. He goes, wow, let me see that. And he's checking it out. And he goes, sure. He yells for a Sharpie, right? So he's the first one that signed it. And that's right there, Greg Lake. And I said, Greg, would you mind? It would be really cool if I had all 3 of his signatures on here. So I asked him, I said, would you mind getting the guys to sign this? He said, sure. So he yells onto the bus, hey, guys, I'm sending the skull, sign this skull. So the skull goes on the bus, and Greg's still here talking for a bit. And he's finished. He gets on the bus, the door shuts, the bus starts to drive off. So I'm like, what the? I bang on the side of the bus, and the bus driver stops. He goes, what? What's the matter? I said, what about the skull? Hey, guys, send the skull up here. So guy comes up, whoever it was, and hands me the skull, and it was all 3 of them signed it. And that's Keith there. Greg on top. And Carl must have wanted to just sign it quickly. I was thinking of getting him to sign it again now that I know him. But there he is there in the back, Carl Palmer. And that's the story of the skull, and that was in March of 1993. Okay? Put this back. Now, the very next night, my brother Andrew, I guess he's feeling a little, as the Italians say, the lamoco. He needed to top this, because we're brothers. We're always trying to outdo each other, right? So I won't get to the bottom of how it happened, but he ended up with Backstage passes. He buys the skull, gets backstage, and pulls out the skull. Gets the guys to sign it, and they're like, well, hey, didn't we sign this last night? Didn't we sign one of these last night? He goes, yeah, that was my brother. Oh, it figures. And they signed it, and Carl signed it more carefully, so he's got a nicer signature of Carl on his, right? So, anyhow, the story of the skulls. Now, that's in 93. Now, back to when I met Tony Ortiz, that was in 97 at the Nautica stage in Cleveland, Ohio. Me and Andrew, we drove. I drove to Cleveland in the pouring rain. I left Toronto early in the morning. I picked Andrew up, Buffalo. It was pouring. It was like torrential rain. All the way there, where we get there, we finally find the venue. We have lots of time to eat and have a few drinks and whatnot. Anyway, we're sitting there having a beer. And I'm like, shit, man, it's an outdoor venue and it's pouring out. I'm like, so Andrew says to me, hey, man, goes, it's ELP. It's not going to rain. It's going to stop. I said, yeah, right. It's been raining like all the way from Toronto all the way here. It's a problem, big storm system, whatever. Anyway, half hour before the show starts, and I'm not lying, the clouds opened up, the sun came out, and ELP went on the stage. I'll never forget that as long as I live. He elbowed, I told you. Anyhow, I got some great photos of that, and I got to find them. I know there's somewhere. I got some really cool photos of that show. I took myself. I got to find them, but I have 2 sets, and I can't remember where I put them. But anyway, back to the skull story. The reason I'm talking about 97 is after the show, we went where the backstage crowd was waiting to get in, and we're like, man, I wish we had backstage passes. Well, we don't. And I got a long 4-hour drive to get back. I'm going to fix that. 3 or 4 hour drive to get back, right? But somebody in the waiting there overheard and said, hey, why don't you guys get in the middle of the crowd and just sort of avoid them seeing you, that you don't have a sticker, because everybody had their backstage sticker. What do we have to lose? Okay, sure. So we weasel. We're in. So we're standing there, and there's a couple of security guys walking around, and Keith and Carl were with the media, and so Greg was the guy we saw. Anyway, the security guard saw that I didn't have my sticker, and Andrew as well, and he says, you two, where's your stickers? You guys got to leave. Greg saw us 4 years later, and he goes, wait a minute. They're with me. It's the Skull Brothers. Blew my lights out. Blew Andrew's lights out. We're the Skull Brothers. He remembered that. I'll never forget that. What a cool memory. Every time I ever met Greg Lake, he was a really nice guy and really friendly with the fans. And that's it. The Skulls story. The following year, we saw him in Toronto, and that turned out to be the last time I ever saw Emerson Lake Palmer. And I only saw Greg Lake once after that, and that was with Ringo Starr. And I have that whole show. I had 2 little microphones on my hat. This was back in the day when I had my cassette recorder, but I got a really good one now. This big. I just put it in my pocket, but I don't record stuff to sell or anything like that. It's in my personal collection, and it's stuff I listen to myself. That's that. That's the name of that tune. If anybody has any questions, feel free, like I said, to put some in the comments. I may do another video. I have a couple of stories. The other stories aren't as good as this one. This was the clincher. The Skull Brothers. That's right. Anyway, I guess I'm going to sign off, and I hope you all enjoy the stories. I know Alfred's going to do an audio, and I may do this again in a month or two. I'm very busy doing my Dark Universe project, which is in dedication to Keith and Greg and Chris Squire and John Wetton, Ellen Holdsworth, Frank Zappa. Those are my main guys that have passed on. I know Keith Emerson was a big Zappa fan. He really liked Frank Zappa's music. So here's to all the ELP fans. I don't have a beer today. I'm just drinking water. So cheers. And I'm looking forward to some of the questions and whatever people have to say. Peace out, and prog on, and go and see Carl Palmer's ELP Legacy. They will be touring with Yes this summer, as well as Asia and John Lodge from the Moody Blues. All right, peace out, take care, and I shall see you out there. Out there.